Something unexpected just happened in the tech world, and almost nobody is talking about it the way they should. While headlines are still busy debating AI hype, GPU shortages, and the next Windows update, a much bigger shift is quietly unfolding behind the scenes. Microsoft is under pressure. NVIDIA is making strategic decisions that speak louder than press releases. And Linux is once again at the center of a technological power shift that could redefine the future of computing. This isn't just another operating system comparison. This is about power, control, performance, and the future of AI infrastructure. For decades, Microsoft Windows has dominated the desktop market. From gaming to enterprise workstations, Windows has been the default environment for millions of users. At the same time, NVIDIA built its empire on graphics innovation, transforming from a gaming GPU company into the backbone of artificial intelligence. The partnership between Windows and NVIDIA seemed natural and unbreakable. Gamers relied on Windows for DirectX support, and NVIDIA optimized its drivers accordingly. Developers targeting consumers built around that ecosystem. It looked stable. It looked permanent. But the world changed. The AI revolution didn't start in gaming PCs. It exploded in data centers. And in those data centers, something very different was happening. Linux was already king. Most of the world's servers, supercomputers, and cloud infrastructure were running Linux distributions. Whether it was Ubuntu, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Debian, or custom enterprise builds, Linux quietly became the foundation of modern computing infrastructure. When AI models began demanding massive parallel processing, scalable networking, and custom kernel-level optimizations, Linux wasn't just an option. It was the obvious choice. NVIDIA understood this earlier than most. When CUDA became the gold standard for GPU computing, it was optimized heavily for Linux environments. Researchers training deep learning models on frameworks like TensorFlow and PyTorch overwhelmingly preferred Linux systems. Universities, startups, and enterprise AI labs built their stacks around Linux because it gave them flexibility, control, and performance tuning options that Windows simply couldn't match in server-scale deployments. And NVIDIA leaned into that reality. Now the tension is becoming more visible. Microsoft has been pushing aggressively into AI with Azure and integrating AI deeply into Windows. From Copilot features to cloud-backed services, Microsoft wants Windows to remain relevant in the AI era. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The real AI training, the real large-scale computation, the real cutting-edge research isn't happening on Windows desktops. It's happening on Linux clusters powered by NVIDIA GPUs. Even Microsoft's own Azure infrastructure relies heavily on Linux-based systems. That's where the pressure begins. When NVIDIA releases optimized drivers, performance improvements, or advanced networking capabilities like NVLink and InfiniBand enhancements, Linux often gets first-class treatment. In high-performance computing environments, Linux distributions receive deeper integration, faster patch cycles, and more direct kernel-level collaboration. Windows, by comparison, often feels like it's playing catch-up in the AI server space. This isn't about conspiracy. It's about engineering reality. Linux allows deep customization. Kernel modules can be tuned specifically for GPU workloads. Scheduler behavior can be adjusted. Memory management can be fine-tuned. In contrast, Windows is more locked down. While powerful for consumer and enterprise desktops, it isn't built with the same open modular philosophy that Linux offers. For AI companies pushing hardware to its limits, that openness matters. NVIDIA's DGX systems, designed specifically for AI workloads, ship primarily with Linux-based operating systems. The NVIDIA AI Enterprise Stack is deeply integrated into Linux environments. Their documentation, enterprise support models, and developer guides frequently assume Linux usage as the baseline. That signals something important. When a company designs its flagship AI hardware around Linux by default, it's not accidental. Meanwhile, Windows remains dominant in gaming. DirectX remains a powerful API, but even here, the ground is shifting. The rise of Vulkan, a cross-platform graphics API supported heavily on Linux, reduces dependency on Windows-specific technologies. Proton, developed by Valve, allows Windows games to run on Linux with impressive compatibility. Steam Deck, which runs on a Linux-based system, has shown that Linux gaming is no longer a joke. And guess whose GPUs power many of those systems? NVIDIA. Microsoft's biggest advantage has always been ecosystem control. Windows integrates seamlessly with Office, enterprise tools, and Active Directory environments. But AI development pipelines don't revolve around Office. They revolve around Python environments, containerization, Kubernetes orchestration, and distributed GPU clusters. And those technologies thrive on Linux. Containers changed everything. Docker was born on Linux. Kubernetes was built around Linux container primitives. Cloud-native architecture depends on Linux kernel features. When companies deploy AI services at scale, they use container orchestration systems that assume Linux as the host OS, while Windows has added container support. It never achieved the same level of native integration or performance efficiency. NVIDIA's own container toolkit is optimized for Linux. GPU pass-through, driver integration, and CUDA compatibility inside containers work most seamlessly in Linux environments. That's not marketing spin. That's operational experience from thousands of AI teams worldwide. So what does this mean for Microsoft? It means Windows is no longer the center of the most important computing revolution of this decade. AI is redefining hardware priorities. GPU compute matters more than desktop UI polish. Data center efficiency matters more than traditional PC dominance. And Linux sits comfortably at the heart of that infrastructure. NVIDIA aligning its most advanced innovations with Linux-first environments sends a powerful message, even if it's not stated publicly. Microsoft isn't blind to this shift. That's why Windows Subsystem for Linux exists. WSL allows developers to run Linux environments directly inside Windows. Think about that for a moment. Instead of convincing developers to abandon Linux, Microsoft embedded Linux into Windows. That move alone acknowledges where real development momentum lies. But WSL is still a bridge. It's not the core. When AI startups scale, they don't deploy WSL clusters. They deploy Ubuntu servers on cloud instances with NVIDIA A100 or H100 GPUs. They tune kernel parameters. They optimize network stacks. They build Linux-native workflows. That becomes their production environment. Windows remains at best a client interface, not the computational backbone. And that's where the fire intensifies. Investors and analysts are beginning to notice that NVIDIA's explosive growth is tied primarily to data center revenue. Not gaming GPUs for Windows PCs, data center GPUs, run overwhelmingly on Linux. That means the fastest growing segment of NVIDIA's business is tightly coupled with Linux infrastructure. If the future of compute is AI-driven and AI compute runs on Linux, then the strategic center of gravity shifts away from Windows dominance. This doesn't mean Windows disappears. It means its role changes. In gaming, Windows still matters. But even gaming is becoming more cloud-driven. Services like cloud gaming platforms often run on Linux servers in data centers. Even when players use Windows at home, the back-end infrastructure often runs Linux. NVIDIA's own cloud gaming solutions leverage Linux environments in their server architecture. The secret isn't that NVIDIA publicly abandoned Windows. It's that its most strategic growth investments revolve around Linux ecosystems. Consider the developer community. AI researchers publish tutorials assuming Linux terminals. GitHub repositories for machine learning frameworks often list Linux installation instructions first. Dependency management, GPU driver installation, and environment setup tend to be smoother on Linux systems. When the majority of cutting-edge research workflows assume Linux, hardware vendors naturally optimize for that environment. Microsoft's response has been to embrace open source more aggressively than ever before. Acquiring GitHub, supporting Linux in Azure, and contributing to kernel development are all part of a broader strategy. But it's a defensive adaptation, not a position of dominance. NVIDIA's quiet preference for Linux in high-performance contexts puts subtle pressure on Microsoft to continuously adapt rather than dictate standards. Even in supercomputing rankings, nearly all of the top supercomputers run Linux. Many of them use NVIDIA GPUs. The combination of Linux and NVIDIA has become synonymous with raw computational power. Windows simply doesn't compete in that arena at scale. And here's the twist nobody expected a decade ago. Microsoft itself relies heavily on Linux in its cloud offerings. Azure supports countless Linux virtual machines. Enterprises deploying AI solutions on Azure often choose Linux images. That means Microsoft profits from Linux usage, even if Windows loses relative influence in certain sectors. The lines are blurred. But strategically, NVIDIA choosing Linux as the primary environment for its AI enterprise stack changes perception. It signals that the future of high-performance computing is open, modular, and Linux-centric. For Windows loyalists, this can feel like a betrayal. For Linux advocates, it feels like validation. For NVIDIA, it's simply business logic. Performance, scalability, and developer adoption drive decisions. Linux wins in those categories for AI infrastructure. Looking ahead to 2026 and beyond, the question isn't whether Windows will survive. It's whether it can redefine its value in an AI-dominated world. If AI workloads continue to dominate hardware investment, and if those workloads continue to run primarily on Linux systems, then the gravitational pull of the industry shifts accordingly. NVIDIA's roadmap focuses heavily on AI accelerators, data center GPUs, networking solutions, and integrated AI stacks. Those stacks integrate seamlessly with Linux. They assume Linux-level access. They leverage Linux container ecosystems. They optimize for Linux kernel behavior. That alignment is not temporary. Microsoft's challenge is not losing relevance entirely. It's maintaining influence in areas where it historically dominated while adapting to a world where Linux powers the most critical infrastructure. The irony is almost poetic. Years ago, Linux was seen as a hobbyist OS, a niche alternative for enthusiasts. Today, it powers the backbone of the AI revolution, supported by the most valuable GPU company in the world. When NVIDIA makes architectural decisions, when it optimizes drivers, when it designs enterprise AI stacks, those decisions increasingly reinforce Linux as the foundational platform. That doesn't generate flashy headlines. It doesn't spark dramatic press conferences. But it changes everything quietly. Because platform preference at the infrastructure level determines where developers invest their skills, where startups build their stacks, and where enterprises commit long-term resources. If Linux remains the primary environment for AI compute, and NVIDIA continues prioritizing it in enterprise deployments, then the center of technological gravity keeps moving. Microsoft is under fire not because of a single announcement, but because of a broader shift in where innovation is happening. The unexpected move isn't a public declaration. It's the accumulation of engineering choices, enterprise integrations, and ecosystem alignments that point in one direction. NVIDIA didn't need to make a loud statement. The market dynamics speak clearly. AI runs on GPUs. GPUs run best on Linux, and the future runs on AI. That equation forces every major tech company, including Microsoft, to adapt to a world where control over the desktop matters less than control over compute infrastructure. The battle isn't Windows versus Linux in the old sense. It's about who anchors the AI era. Right now, Linux and NVIDIA stand at the center of that transformation, and Microsoft is racing to ensure it isn't left watching from the sidelines.